Well, welcome everyone. It's a pleasure to have you with us today. For those that I haven't had the pleasure of meeting, my name is Craig Toalson. I'm the CEO of the Home Builders Association of Virginia, and today we are going to be doing a webinar for our multifamily housing industry. It's a significant segment of what we do in our membership, and we are trying to lean in more into our different specialty areas of our membership. So while we are the Home Builders Association of Virginia, we want to start communicating more effectively with the different individual segments, and multifamily is so significant. So thank you for being with us today as we try and work through this new initiative. I'll get into our speakers, introduce them here shortly, but we have our friends from the Virginia Realtors participating, so we're very grateful for that relationship and all that we do at the General Assembly, the legislative and regulatory front. So for the agenda for today, next slide there, we're going to be talking about the Virginia Residential Landlord Tenant Act, the Licensing and Real Estate Board, property management, reducing development costs, and expanding access to capital, and protecting, of course, those important development incentives. Well, each speaker will be speaking for roughly 20 minutes each, and then we'll leave 20 minutes at the end for some discussion and questions. And if you'd like questions, to put questions in the chat, that's the easiest way to do that, and we'll answer those at the end. Our sponsors for today. HBAV relies heavily on sponsorship dollars, and our most significant committed sponsors are our Keystone Club partners. Everyone on this screen has committed their time and their resources into our association in 2025. We could not do it without them. So please support these members, support these businesses. They are really lifting the weight for the entire industry, single family, residential, multifamily, you name it. So take a snapshot and either consider doing business with them or continue to do business with them, and thank them for their sponsorship. All right, so just to give you a brief overview of why are we doing this here in April and what's going on, bring you up to speed. This year in 2025 was a short session of the Virginia General Assembly. It was a quick 46-day session where we had roughly 2,000 bills introduced. And what's going on here in Richmond, and what's going on and why it's important. Of course, you know that Virginia is a Dillon rule state, and the laws of the Commonwealth are made here in Virginia every January. There are 100 members in the Virginia House of Delegates, and the House of Delegates is currently controlled by the Democratic Party. And then we have the state Senate, 40 members of the state Senate, also controlled by the Democratic Party. We have divided government, which is actually a good thing for us, and it tends to be more efficient and able for us to really have those discussions about what's important to the industry. And we say it's divided government because, of course, the administrative branch or the executive branch, excuse me, is controlled by Governor Youngkin. The leadership, we have the Speaker of the House, Speaker Don Scott, from down at the coastal area. And the president of the Senate is Lieutenant Governor Winsome Sears, who many of you know is running for governor against Abigail Spanberger. There's some nice photos of our members on our lobby day, and Andrew Clark at the podium. So how do we come up with our legislative agenda? And the reason we're bringing this up is, while we're just on the heels of coming off the 2025 General Assembly session, we're already looking ahead to the 2026 session. So if you have ideas, if you have priorities, if you have things that are keeping you up at night, please communicate those to HBAV through your local association. Send us an email. It's never too soon to start looking at ways that we can help best support the industry. We will start this now. We'll work through our legislative committee. When it comes to session, we're up at the General Assembly every single day, vetting bills, speaking to bills, meeting with stakeholders. And then when session adjourns, of course, we do the final step in the process. You can't Bill isn't done until the governor reviews it, signs it, and it becomes law on July 1. So today we're going to be going over the 2025 bills that passed and how your business will be effective July 1st. Little snapshot is that there were roughly 2,000 bills. So you see there on the outer ring, 1,994 bills were introduced this year. 916 bills passed both the House and the Senate, and 231 of these bills had a direct impact on the housing industry. And we use that term a lot, the housing industry. Again, our association's name is the Home Builders Association. We realize that apartments, multifamily product are a home. We represent the entire housing industry, and that's significant. So 12% of every piece of legislation that was introduced had an impact on our members, on our future home buyers, on our future renters. So that's what we're going to be going over today. And again, all that happened in just 45 days. So I am going to introduce our speakers. And again, HBAV and the Virginia Realtors are very close partners. We work hand in hand with them. The relationship goes back many, many years through many different executives and lobbyists. So we're very grateful for the coordination. First, we have Erin Kormann. Erin is the Senior VP of Legal Operation and Legislative Counsel at the Virginia Realtors, and she has been there since 2015, so congratulations on your 10 years. Erin works with the government relations team to research all their potential legislative issues, similar to what I just discussed, what we do at HBAV. She works to draft legislation, and she's always providing testimony. So if you turn on any of the public comment or any of the committee meetings, you'll see that Virginia is truly speaking at the podium for the Virginia Realtors. She also has 5 years experience practicing law and 7 years selling real estate. So she has a very astute background in this industry. And then we have Andrew Clark. Andrew is HBAV's Vice President of Government Affairs. He has been at HBAV for 8 years and manages our complete government affairs and regulatory programs. So he is very active on the legislative front, on the regulatory front when it comes to environmental, VDOT, Department of Environment, well, I mentioned environmental, and the building code. He has been very instrumental and was instrumental in the establishment of the Virginia Housing Opportunity Tax Credit many years ago. He spent many meetings in that to make sure that worked for our members, and of course, preserving the Virginia Historic Tax Credit. So I just want to welcome you both. I appreciate, and I know our members appreciate you taking the time to speak and communicate what's going into effect and where we go for the 2026 session. So with that, I'll turn it over to Erin.
Thank you. So I am going to focus on the landlord tenant property management part of the bills that passed this year. Andrew will cover all the rest. And Andrew, do you want me to wait until the end for questions? You want me to take them as we go? It's up to you.
I think we can, if anything pops up, I don't know who's tracking the comments. Well, we'll wait till the end. That way we can kind of just get through everything.
That sounds good. So I tried to group these into categories, and the first ones we will look at are the laws that have passed that will actually change the VRLTA. So the first one is renewal notices. This changes 55.1-1204, the terms, the section on terms of the rental agreement. It now states that landlords who own more than 4 rental units or more than 10% interest, so this is your 1 to 4 exemption, owners that own more than that must provide written notice of a non-renewal to any tenant who has the option to renew or has an automatic renewal clause. Those notices have to now be provided no later than 60 days prior to the end of the lease term. Second change to this same code section is under methods of payment. So this section will now state that no landlord shall charge a tenant any fee for the collection or processing of any payment of rent, security deposit, or any other fee, unless the landlord also offers an alternative method of payment that does not include additional fees. So if you guys are using software programs that are charging fees to pay by ACH or credit cards, you have to also offer a method of payment that does not have an additional fee attached to it. We saw another change to the VRLTA with respect to early lease termination for victims of abuse. Last year, this law changed and added permanent protective orders and defined the termination period as 30 days from the date the notice of termination is given by the tenant. The bill came back again this year to make several additional tweaks. It now includes victims of stalking and human trafficking, and it also added preliminary protective orders. The reasoning behind this is that often victims will get a preliminary protective order because a permanent protective order isn't granted until years later after the criminal trial is completed. These victims could have the preliminary protective order for years, leaving them stuck in their lease and unable to relocate. And so the law was changed this year to add prelim. It also now allows for the tenant, when they're providing evidence to the landlord to terminate, they can also now provide a warrant, a summons, an indictment, in addition to the conviction, so long as the action that they're claiming occurs during the term of an active and current rental agreement. And finally, weirdly, the termination period was changed to 28 days now from 30. This was a negotiation, a hotly negotiated issue, in order to get the patron to remove emergency protective orders from the language. So it's now 28 days instead of 30. Another bill that we saw this year to fix some issues from last year. Last year, we saw a law that requires landlords to provide, beginning on the first page of the lease, a description of any rent and fees to be charged to the tenant. And they have a disclaimer or disclosure statement that they have to put on there that says no fee shall be collected unless it's listed below, etc. This bill language was super confusing. It used undefined language. It was very difficult to comply with. And so an update bill this year came from Delegate Simon to clarify things. It now requires an itemization of all charges to the tenant that make up the security deposit, the amount of rent due per payment period, and any additional one-time charges due prior to the commencement date of the rental agreement. That's your move-in fees, your leasing fees, etc. The disclosure language was updated to match that. This law does have a enactment clause. It only applies to rental agreements that are entered into, extended, or renewed after July 1st, 2025. So if you have an existing one, you're good. And we had our yearly eviction diversion bill. Hopefully this will be the last one. This bill ends the pilot program. And so basically makes it a statewide permissive program, allows for it to be implemented by any general district court of the Commonwealth. So it'll be up to the courts as to whether they use the program or not. The next group of bills have to do with real estate licensing and the real estate board. One that will probably be important for you guys is a clarification of the exemption from licensing provision in 54.1-2103 that allows persons employed by a real estate broker for or on behalf of the owner of any real estate that the broker is contracted to manage. So this is your employees that are on site. Previously, there was a list of actions that they could do and continue to not have a license. The bill this year clarified that those unlicensed employees can also accept and sign broker-approved rental agreements state or federal required disclosures, and any other documents required for compliance with fair housing. It also clarifies that those employees can accept security deposits, rent, and other payments as contracted for in the lease. So a lot of people thought this was already the case. We started seeing some investigations from DPOR and the real estate board, and so this bill was put in to clarify what these unlicensed employees can do. They still cannot negotiate any terms or money amounts in the contract. Real estate board qualifications. This was actually a bill that was brought by Virginia Realtors. It changes the requirements and qualifications necessary for a licensee to sit on the real estate board. The required years of experience increases to 7 years actively engaged in the real estate profession. Real estate licensees on the board will also have to have a certain level of proficiency, and they can show that by either having experience in real estate credentialing or certification by the board as a real estate instructor, or training, having training or experience in the adjudication of other real estate licensees. And most importantly, for our purposes today, now at least one member of the board will be required to have experience in the area of residential property management. So we do have some additional bills to review that touched on property management. They didn't really fit in a fancy category, so they're in the other category. The buyer tenant representation bill. This is an important bill. It changes the language in 54.1. It was also part of the Virginia Realtors legislative agenda. This law will now require licensees who are working with buyers or tenants to have a written agreement with that person before showing them property. This does not apply to listing agents or your on-site property managers who are contacted by an unrepresented buyer for a showing. They're already contracted with the owner. It's only for agents working with a buyer or tenant. Because the bill does require a written agreement prior to showing property, it does go into defining what showing property means. I'm happy to answer questions about that, but it's pretty specifically laid out in the law. Indigent appeal bonds. So I'm going to go over this, but before you take notes on this, just know that this bill is still in a state of flux. The governor has until May 2nd to act on this bill. It went to the governor stating no indigent person shall be required to post a bond to appeal any unlawful detainer action brought by a public housing authority. It also said that if the landlord is a public housing authority, the landlord shall not require the tenant to pay fees for maintenance or repair, and gave a very long list of requirements for the notice for non-payment of rent. The governor sent the bill back to the General Assembly at reconvene, stating that he approved of the general purpose, but he didn't like the language. And the language he sent back removed everything I just told you and just left it with a notice of non-payment of rent. The General Assembly rejected that amendment and sent it back. So what does that mean? It means the governor has until 11:59 on May 2nd to either accept the bill language as is or veto it completely. So if this is an area that you guys are working in, I would say just be mindful that it's still floating out there, and you'll have to check after May 2nd to see if your requirements have changed. Mold. So we did have another mold bill this year, but it's really building on and fixing the bill from last year that went into the Consumer Protection Act. The Consumer Protection Act last year made it a violation to sell or offer for sale services as a professional mold remediator without holding a mold remediation certificate. And it listed one type of certificate, and all of the other mold certification programs got very upset about that. And so this bill was put forth to fix that. It just says now they have to be certified by a national or internationally recognized body for mold remediation. More importantly, for our purposes, it does say now that it's a violation for mold remediation services to not comply with the EPA requirements for mold. And this portion of the act is effective immediately. And then the law also instructs DPOR with the Department of Health and mold industry professionals to study the current state of mold inspection and mold remediation in the Commonwealth and decide whether it would benefit the consumers, the public, to make that a licensed profession. So it used to be licensed, then it wasn't. Now they're going to study and determine whether they need to do that again. And they have until January 2026 to do that. So. There was a furlough bill that was thrown in very close to the end of bill introductions, and it made some changes to the furlough bill that passed several years ago. Most importantly, it changed the definition of the closure of the U.S. federal government. It used to have to be closed for at least 14 consecutive days for the other provisions of the bill to kick in. That is no longer the case. It's just has to be closed. And as long as that definition is met, and along with the other criteria that the federal government, as a result of a lapse of appropriation leading to curtailment of federal agency activities and services, shutdowns, essential employees, then the protections kick in. And it's a furloughed homeowner or owner of a rental property who is facing foreclosure now gets a 60-day stay. It used to be 30, so it's been increased to 60 after providing the court with the required furlough information. The 60-day stay on unlawful detainer action stays the same. However, the provisions of the bill will not apply where there's a separate signed agreement between the landlord and the tenant. Same for homeowner and mortgage holder, to stay any legal action or defer the filing of an unlawful detainer for 60 days or more. So if you guys are coming up with agreements with your tenants to defer unlawful detainers or whatever, a payment plan, and it's 60 days or greater, then the provisions of the furlough bill will not apply. And this bill did have an emergency clause on it, which means it's effective immediately.
So Erin, real quick on that one, the certain trigger has to be hit for those new rules to kick in, right?
So the trigger that has to happen is you need a closure of the United States government, which is defined as closure of the government as a result of a lapse of appropriations that leads to the curtailment of federal agency activities and services, shutdown of non-essential operations, and non-essential workers being furloughed. It used to be that had to last for 14 days or more. That requirement's been taken out.
All right, because one of the questions I have heard is, how will landlord property owners know that this kicks into effect?
I guess the first time a tenant shows up with their furlough docs asking for a
Right.
delay.
Right, exactly.
I mean, I think if the government shuts down, it's usually all over the news. So I think we know that happens.
Yeah.
Now, I guess, if it shuts down for an hour or a day, then the rest of this bill will kick in. So.
Okay.
Andrew may have more information on this one, but a locality is already allowed to adopt an ordinance which establishes a uniform schedule of civil penalties for violations of specific zoning ordinances. This law increases the penalty amount for repeat violations on properties zoned or used for multifamily residential purposes. So the penalty amounts for those properties are now increased to $1,000 for the second violation, $1,500 for the third, and any subsequent, with a maximum of $6,000 in a 1-year period. It also clarifies that the court has the authority to order the abatement or the remedy of the zoning violation for the multifamily property. And for those of you that manage larger affordable housing products under the various federal housing laws, this bill did not pass last year, but it did pass this year. HB 2245 will now require those properties be assessed using the income approach. And the Department of Taxation will develop a uniform income expense form to be provided to assessors and filled out by the property owners. In order to give everyone time to get up to speed on this one, it's got a delayed enactment date of January 1st, 2026. And so, Andrew, that's sort of my overview of what happened in landlord tenant world. I'm happy to answer any questions so people don't forget them before we shift gears.
Yeah. I mean, I'll have one that I get a lot from our multifamily folks is every year, I think probably in the last 5 or 6, Landlord Tenant Act changes 1,000 times every session. And Erin's presentation there, just for those who haven't been down to Richmond, is a very modest explanation of how much landlord tenant work she does. So for developers who are also managing their properties, you know, the uncertainty of the shifting requirements, do you anticipate, it's kind of a loaded question, anticipate that slowing down now that virtually every section of that code has been changed? Or, you know, should multifamily property owners expect kind of a steady stream of bills every year to change those requirements?
I'm going to give you a 2-part answer. I would say always expect a steady stream of bills in landlord tenant. I think I told you earlier we had 60 this year, which actually felt kind of low. And then I would say we, as Craig was saying in the beginning, we do have a divided government right now, with the legislature Democrat and the governor Republican. If that were to change next year, and everything was to go Democrat, I would expect a tidal wave. All the bills that we have been able to hold back for years and years and years, I think, and they're brought every year, your rent control bills, your criminal background check bills, all the things, I think would make it a lot further, if not past the governor in a fully Democratic government. So we will see what happens.
I don't know if there's questions in chat. I did get a text message from somebody saying, what's the worst bill? What was this? What should property owners expect in the situation you were just describing in the Landlord Tenant Act? Like one of the more consequential changes that you think the industry will have to grapple with?
I'm going to be, I hate to call the perfect game. So I'm going to say, I think we would still be okay on the rent control side. But I worry about the 10 to 15, oh gosh, what am I trying to say? Changing the time period for the non-compliance for payment of rent.
Yeah.
That one I really worry about. It got very close this year. Putting us at 15 days for that would make us one of the most liberal, if not the most liberal state in the United States of America. I think the closest is like at 10 to 12 days. Okay. I definitely see that one being a problem. I also see if the economy keeps going the way it is and we don't get some more housing supply, issues with application fees again.
Yeah.
Those two I think are very likely to come back and could make it far, if not pass, if we had an all Democrat government. So,
which, speaking of housing supply, and that's why although thank you, Erin, for going through that. And again, Erin said very nonchalantly 60 landlord tenant bills. She reads through those plus every other bill, just to give you guys an extent of our organization's work together. You know, right before session, I think we sit on a 6-hour Zoom call going through each bill. I'm
I feel like
mostly,
that's optimistic. I feel like it's more 8 to 10. Our families know each other. So
yeah. So I'm mostly taking notes on everything that all the insights she's got. She digs deep in the bills and is a huge asset, not just for the realtors, but for our association and specifically our multifamily members. So I'm going to shift over to our legislative agenda, which of course is focused on supply, land development, construction, and all those everything that happens prior to the transaction of an actual of a transaction or a renter getting into a unit. Now I'm going to start off with kind of our broad categories here, which is, I think, first priority, streamlining the review process. Uh, Senator Van Valkenburg in Richmond introduced a bill that removes the Planning Commission or the governing body from reviewing site plans and subdivision plats. So after you've gotten your rezoning and you've gone through that rigorous battle and that back and forth, negotiated for who knows how long, you enter into an administrative approval stage. By code, that's always been a administrative approval, but what we've seen is a lot of localities will actually take those staff approved site plans and subdivision plats and send them to the planning commission for a a rubber stamp review, or for just making sure the planning commission is informed on what's going on. And those simple public hearings end up with neighbors coming out complaining about construction dust or flooding issues or stormwater issues, or asking for less density. We're just not wanting the project at all, and the planning commission not fully understanding its role will often send that back to staff and say, hey, continue negotiating with the applicant. And so that's, in a lot of instances, how you get these never-ending reviews on administrative site plans. We surveyed a lot of our members and found, I think the average was about 26 to 28 months reviewing a site plan for a residential subdivision. And, in the localities that are really, I think, hitting like peak performance, it's a fraction of that. And so we've made those reviews purely administrative. They can't be sent to the planning commission. So you're going to have more predictability in the process, less opportunity for there to be community or political pressure, and quite frankly, less opportunities for the locality to kind of extract more concessions out of a developer. Of course, unfortunately, for better or worse, in our world, laws become effective July 1, but they only really come into play if the locality adopts the ordinance. Now, this is required, so locality must update their ordinance, but you want to make sure you're staying on top of your jurisdictions and saying, this law is in effect July 1. It needs to be effective and applied July 1. Second bill along that same vein, faster review times. And this is exactly what it sounds like. During site plan and subdivision plat reviews, the code actually lays out certain periods of time where a locality has to provide comments. And in a stroke of genius, we simply reduced the vast majority of those timelines. We cut about 135 days out of the overall process. So that's preliminary and final plat and plan review, which is pretty significant. We heard from localities who, of course, did not like this bill. One of their first responses was, well, we need to hire more staff. And when you unpack that with them a little bit more, a lot of them came down and say, well, 2 to 3 more full-time employees would really help us hit these deadlines. And at $60,000 to $80,000 a pop per employee, it's a small price to pay to expedite cutting several months out of the review process. So Again, this is going to be a bill that you will have to go to your localities and say, make sure they're implementing. We also put in what we thought was kind of an innovative approach to kind of breaking out of the back and forth of comments and resubmittals. And so that provision requires that after a third submission, clearly something's not working. And so instead of kind of going back and forth with that same plan reviewer, developers most often don't want to go around that reviewers and go up to their boss and say, hey, I'm having issues. And so by law now, after third submissions, those plans will go up to the director, who will then have a 14-day period to either approve the plan as submitted, approve and allow for some minor modifications that they will then approve administratively within 7 days. So kind of like a quick table review, or say, hey, my plan reviewer got it right, go back to the drawing board and resubmit. Lastly, if for any of those that have read the state code on how this process works, it's almost undecipherable. And so we have provisions in there to have the Virginia Code Commission actually clean that code section up to make it, I think, easier for our members to know their rights, essentially, and for localities to create a more uniform review process across the state. We have a Dillon rule, but if the way those code sections are drafted now, site plan reviews in one locality will look completely different in the locality next door. And fortunately for Erin, we dragged her into this code commission, which I think she found out or remembered the other week when she got an email saying, congratulations, you're going to be helping out with this. We'll also be on that, and soliciting input from our members. This is just if you can see it, kind of a summary of what timelines have changed. So you'll see local review timelines, state agencies requirement to get back to the locality, forwarding plans to state agencies for their reviews, and then review timelines for resubmissions. The second theme that we had is lowering development costs for obvious reasons. Housing prices continue to spike. The upfront cost of land development between land prices and then going through the entitlement process and all the other regulatory requirements, lowering the development cost, the upfront cost trickles down and helps the industry bring more affordable starter homes to the market. First, this bill from Senator Lamont Bagby resolves really what's been a long-term conflicting legal interpretations over a locality's ability to reimburse water and sewer connection fees, capital recovery charges, and availability fees. So why is this important? Just you can see here, I've kind of pulled some numbers. The average single family connection fee, so just to tap into the system, in 2023 was $12,000 per house. That's just a one-time flat fee, $12,000 per house. So right off the bat, 12 grand plus all cash proffers and everything else. The highest in the state was $46,000. And this has been a steady trend over the years. This is not just a snapshot in time. They continue to rise. On the multifamily side, often higher. I just pulled two kind of sample localities, $37,000 per unit in Hanover, and nearly $14,000 per unit in Stafford County. So, if you're doing a 20 unit, 50 unit, 100 unit project, those numbers really start to add up, obviously. Now, this bill is not, localities aren't required to start giving out reimbursements for connection fees. This bill says localities, you can do it. And we did that because a lot of water authorities and locality utility departments said, we can't do it. The law doesn't allow it. And it's been a mixed bag across the state. So we clarified that. But you're going if for those of you that are working with your jurisdictions, you want to make them aware of this, essentially a clarification or strengthening of the language, and you want to start to work with them about how this connection fee reimbursement program could work, who qualifies, the process to apply. Henrico County, for example, is doing it, and it's been very well received by the development community. This just shows the steady trend of water connection fees. This is just for single family. I didn't have the multifamily data, and it just covers water capital recovery charges and connection fees. So again, General Assembly is always saying we need more workforce housing. These are things like connection fees that the General Assembly can directly influence. Can't control local zoning necessarily, but you can help lower the cost that ultimately drive up those final sales prices. The third category, financing and incentives. Huge part of what is going to spur, I think, more development, both in suburban and rural areas that are looking for new economic development investments. Number one on our list is the historic rehab tax credit, which has been, I think, the lifesaver, one of the most effective rehabilitation tools for urban, suburban, and rural areas alike. I don't have the map on here now, but if you look at where these projects are happening, all of downtown Richmond, Norfolk, Danville, all the way to Southwest Virginia have utilized this program. For years, legislators have tried to cap it, sunset it, eliminate it. And this is one of the rare occasions where our industry aligns lockstep with the preservationists and the conservationists, which is a amazing alliance that occurs very infrequently. But so we took it this year based on some of the bills over the last couple of sessions. We said, hey, we've got to get ahead of this and educate legislators that this is not a handout to developers, that this is actually spurring new residential and commercial development in areas that would otherwise not see it. Like Craig mentioned at the beginning, the housing opportunity tax credit, which is essentially a state equivalent of our of the federal low-income housing tax credit. We set it up in 2021, quadrupled it a year later. This year, it was set to expire. We extended it for 5 years and increased the credit cap to $64 million per calendar year. So that's $64 million in tax credits that will be allocated per year. 20 million of those will be set aside for essentially rural areas. And you'll see here, balance of state pool definition. That's how VHDA kind of qualifies what constitutes a rural project. So we wanted to make sure the tax credits are increasing supply, not just in our cities, but in our rural areas as well. Erin mentioned affordable housing tax assessments. So I won't retread that, but that's been a several-year initiative that started off with an AG's opinion that we requested through Delegate Kerry Coyner, a failed bill last year, and legislation this year that made it through, and I think will significantly tamp down on these massive spikes in property tax increases that have really almost driven people out of the multifamily LIHTC market. Another bill, this bill did not pass, but along the same line of incentivizing new development. Infrastructure is a huge impediment in every part of the state. And so despite that, the state hasn't really invested dollars into like they have commercial or manufacturing infrastructure. into expanding water lines, water and sewer lines, stormwater infrastructure. And so this bill would have set up essentially a competitive revolving loan fund or grant program that a locality and developer would come together to the Virginia Resource Authority, say, hey, here's our project. Project would be ranked on a list of certain qualifications, characteristics, how impactful it would be. And then that money would be sent to the locality to cover fully offset or cover a portion of those infrastructure costs. And again, it applies to everything but electric utilities. So that bill didn't pass. We're going to come back next year. Erin and I spent a lot of time last year working with a work group within DHCD to structure that fund. It was just a tough budget year, and so it didn't make it through this year. Just for glimpses of life at the General Assembly here. Bills that didn't advance that I think you can expect to see next year. Number one, HB 1758 from Deborah Gardner in Richmond. This is a bill that we kind of adopted, and essentially it would expedite the process for localities to sell surplus land, and it would prioritize residential development. So essentially both state and local governments would have to prioritize selling surplus land to residential developers before even putting it out to anybody else. The second bill, we call it the Targets Bill, and this was a really innovative and aggressive approach from both Senator Van Valkenburg and Dan Helmer in Northern Virginia to effectively say localities have to accommodate and facilitate a certain percentage of housing growth each year. It established a state level board that would adjudicate land use decisions where a developer says, hey, I think my case was denied unfairly. And this would give really an expedited forum for developers to say and challenge some of those local land use decisions. It was an aggressive bill. We're going to continue working with both patrons on that in the coming year to hopefully get that over the line next session. Local rent control, I believe Erin mentioned this one. Both of those bills have been defeated. They've been defeated several years now. Transportation impact fees, essentially cash proffers on steroids. So by right or rezoned property would be subject to an impact fee that per unit impact fee. The one example that one locality is using it now, Stafford, actually took the most aggressive and ordinance adoption they possibly could and applied it not just to single family, but to multifamily, to office, commercial, retail, and industrial, and really shut down economic development. And that's not an exaggeration. And so this bill would have said all localities in the Commonwealth can do this. And it's a very enticing program because it sounds great. More money for roads. The reality is there are more effective ways to finance road infrastructure. And so that bill was defeated. Inclusionary zoning, this is a big one for multifamily developers, also known as affordable dwelling unit ordinances. Inclusionary zoning essentially allows the locality to require developers to restrict rents on a certain percentage of units within a new development. Certain localities in Virginia have really unchecked authority. They can design their programs to be as strict or stringent as they want, or as lax and ineffective as they would want to. These bills and a couple others have, in the last 2 years, have made it all the way to the governor's desk and would have expanded that authority statewide. These programs are incredibly complex. We'll send this slide deck out, but our arguments against a mandatory inclusionary zoning are pretty simple. The numbers have shown California, New York, jurisdictions across the country that have implemented it, that slows housing production. It increases the cost of the market rate units in order to subsidize the below market rate units. Like I said, reduces housing production. And you'll just interesting data. San Francisco Bay Area housing production fell by an average of 31% the year after they adopted these ordinances, and Pittsburgh had similar effects. Boston saw a 10% decline in housing starts. Comprehensive plan authorities, these bills are often pitched as well, we're just changing our locality's ability to plan development and make sure we've got all the right infrastructure and schools. Our big concerns with these bills, even though we all want clean water and we want, nobody's here is opposed to public health and safety. But when you add these provisions into the comp plan, they start to be used as a reason to deny a rezoning. And that's because the comp plan is one of the biggest factors in determining whether a development project is approved or denied. The broader the language, the more subjective the language, the easier it is for really a small group of folks to come out, put a political pressure on their elected officials and say, deny this project. And so, there are ways to support clean water initiatives and to provide for healthy communities without further broadening those comp plan provisions that are really driving and blocking a lot of new residential development. Probably the most looked at multifamily bill this year, ironically, was one to require, allow localities to require solar canopies over parking lots. And we'll just leave it at that. Fairly costly, expensive endeavor. That's going to come back next year in one way or another. We are looking at ways to address the issue that the patron wanted to address without imposing that cost on our members. But that was luckily defeated. And then, of course, our annual tree preservation and critical root zone bills. I'll close out with three quick things. Two bills that we did several years ago that are now being implemented. Transparency in housing policy. State governments, state legislators have very little insight into what goes on, good, bad, and ugly at the local level. And our job at the builders and with the realtors is to really kind of shine a light on the policies that are constraining supply. And that's really difficult to do when you've got 130 some odd localities whose documents are buried in an agenda somewhere at the county building. This bill, pretty simple approach, but I think the data that will yield is significant. Says localities, anytime you change a policy or an ordinance related to development or construction, they've got to report that to DHCD. So over time, you can start to identify what localities are shifting one way or another. It's also a good tool for, finding best practices. The second bill, we hear lots. We need more lots. We need more supply. Where do we get them? Similar to what the economic developers do at the state level with manufacturing and commercial development, they advertise sites that are ready to go. So if an international company from overseas says, I want to open up a new plant in Mecklenburg or wherever, they've got a database they can go to and pick out a site. We don't have anything like that for residential. And so we established through legislation effectively kind of this residential ready parcels and buildings portal. And so if you're a developer or builder, you can go onto this portal here. It will show you the site, where it's located, all the zoning, really all the site characteristics, zoning, permitted density, water and sewer capacity, everything you really need to start that feasibility analysis. And so what we're asking is, localities have to upload this information, and they're starting to do it now. But if you're a developer and focusing in certain regions or in a certain locality, urge your jurisdictions to start putting properties into that database. Makes it easier to track where these jurisdictions actually want to facilitate and see growth. And then our big initiative that just started, update to the 2024 update to Virginia's building code, known as the 2024 cycle, just started April 1, two-phase process. The first phase will end in August of 2026, and that's effectively for builders, developers, design professionals. August 26th is when you'll know generally what the next code is going to look like, so you can begin preparing for whether you have to redesign your floor plans or kind of figure out what materials you're going to need. But the code will not be adopted until about June 2027, and then a 1-year grace period after that, and becomes mandatory in 2028. Just data from our national association about what is driving multifamily costs. 41% of multifamily development costs are coming from those local, state, and federal regulations. And building codes actually account for the highest share of that cost, 11% coming from changes to the building code. This is a sample of some of the changes that are in the new codes. These are not effective in Virginia right now. There will be codes that we have to, over the next year, 2 years, sit down, review, and then really debate at code hearings, either defeating them entirely, amending them, or if they're good for our industry, helping them get over the finish line. So EV charging stations and R2 occupancy, so lower density multifamily, high-rise buildings for the folks who are doing larger structures, that's has potential to require a lot more fire and life safety protections. And then owner's responsibility for fire protection. This is an interesting new requirement at the national level. But basically, every multifamily project would be required to have a site safety plan and do daily inspections of fire protection systems. And there's a lot more to that, but for today's call, we'll get into that. But we'll need, obviously, you guys to engage with us throughout that process. It is stakeholder heavy, and you've got the ability to really shape what our next code looks like. So with that, we're happy to take questions. I know we're running up on noon. For folks that have questions, we can take them for Erin or I, or we can just keep going on and on about the 45-day session. I can see Craig.
You did good. You wrapped up at only a few minutes, but we'll have a few questions right now. So thank you, Erin and Andrew. Very thorough. Erin has her. Did you have your hand up, Erin?
No.
Oh, okay. All right.
Oh, no.
Andrew, there's a couple questions in the chat here. First is from Dan with Cathcart. How do site plan review timelines apply to jurisdictions with by agency reviews? Frederick County has 10 review agencies and no consolidated submission coordinator, the way that Chesterfield does, for example.
So if I'm understanding that question, bifurcated agency reviews. So the timelines apply I'm trying to understand that question a little bit. The timelines apply no matter how many local review agencies there are. So if you've got 10, environmental engineering, fire, whoever, or just a handful of them, they've got to get those reviews done
All within that same time frame. They don't
all
just
within
they
that
don't each
same.
get a new clock.
Um, all right, I see your follow-up question, meaning submissions are made directly to each agency independently. So what we've said to localities is that they're going to have to start doing the days of passing it to one and then passing to the next agency, and then just kind of making it around the horn are going to have to be over. They're going to have to hit these timelines, hire new folks. Again, like Frederick County may have been one of the localities that said, hey, we just need to hire 2 or 3 more people. And so um, uh, there is no exemption of that no matter what locality you're in. I think we exempted people under localities under 5,000, but it applies. And effectively, because it's not going to the planning commission, it's going to be the locality's designated agent who's going to do the ultimate sign off. And there's some other language I really didn't get into, but effectively giving the designated agent for a locality the ability to say this site plan or subdivision plat is substantially compliant. It allows them to go around to all their agencies and say, hey, you guys good? Let's not nitpick this. Let's not pass it around the internal system. Just give me the stamp of approval. We can and move on. And Dan, I can follow up with you if I didn't get at your question.
You see the other question
Yeah,
about
Nate, can you speak to
the sprinklers?
Yeah, so some of you may know that the 2021 Virginia Construction Code contained several changes that required R2 and R3 occupancies to install NFPA 13 sprinkler systems. So essentially a high-rise commercial grade sprinkler system into 2/2 townhome type construction. And I'm kind of oversimplifying that, but long story short, the 2021 code was intended to get at podium construction, so underground parking, and then a building above it, or I'm sorry, a podium with a building above it, and the language didn't hit the mark. And so we went through a couple steps. We had DHCD urge localities to do code modifications, and then we kept finding more issues with it. And so as of the other week, the Board of Housing and Community Development, we brought forward some language to essentially roll back the sprinkler requirements for R3 buildings to the 2018 code. And for R2 buildings, they would have to comply with the 2024 IBC requirements. And that's going to be, I'll back up. Those were emergency regulations. The board approved them, effectively resolving the big issue that a lot of folks came to us about. It is now at the executive level review. So the governor's looking at it, and we expect hopefully within the next week or two that he signs it, and upon his signature, it's effective immediately. And so that's not a code modification. That is just the upon his signature, building officials will have to comply with allowing for NFPA 13R sprinklers and R3, and complying for R2 with the 2024 code. And we'll have an update about that out shortly.
That's it for questions in the Q&A. If I can, I just want to direct everyone to our website, hbav.com, under news and resources. We list all of our legislation. We'll constantly, as we have updates to the building code and the governor signs that emergency regulation, that all the notice will be there. So hbav.com news, and then we also have a resource tab as well. Well, I think that wraps up today. I appreciate everyone joining us, and special thanks to Andrew and Erin for putting the presentations together, spending your time. I know a lot goes into this, so I can't thank you enough. And to our members, really appreciate it, and reach out to us if you ever need anything.